The red warning lights flashed across the command deck of the Coalition flagship as Commander Zethkar stared at the tactical display with growing dread. Another star system had gone dark in the Outer Rim territories. The Void Swarm was moving, faster than anyone had predicted, consuming entire worlds and leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. Zethkar's scaled fingers drummed against the command console as he reviewed the casualty reports. The reptilian commander had served the Galactic Defense Coalition for over 30 cycles, but he had never faced an enemy like this. The Void Swarm didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners, and didn't seem to want anything except the complete consumption of all organic life. "Sir, we have received confirmation from the Kepler system," reported his aide, a tall, blue-skinned ethereal named Mindlink 7. "Total planetary consumption completed in 48 hours. No survivors detected." The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Zethkar closed his yellow eyes and tried to push down the fear that was growing in his chest. The Coalition had been formed 200 years ago to maintain peace between the various galactic civilizations. They had dealt with pirates, territorial disputes, and even a few minor wars between species. But nothing had prepared them for an enemy that wanted to eat the entire galaxy. "How many worlds have we lost in the past month?" Zethkar asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. 17 confirmed destroyed, sir. 3 more have gone silent and are presumed consumed. Our current projections show that, at this rate, the swarm will reach the core systems within 2 years. Zethkar opened his eyes and looked around at his bridge crew. They were some of the best officers from across the galaxy, representing 12 different species and hundreds of years of combined military experience. But fear was written on every face, whether scaled, furred, or crystalline. "What is the status of our recruitment efforts?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mindlink 7 consulted his datapad with mechanical precision. "The Krillian Empire has committed an additional 50,000 warriors. The Valdorian healer councils are providing medical support, but refuse combat roles due to their pacifist beliefs. The Ethereal Collective has offered tactical coordination but states their physical forms are too fragile for frontline duty." "That's not enough," Zethkar said flatly. "We need fresh perspectives, new tactics, and more bodies." "What about the species on our watch list? The ones we haven't made contact with yet?" "There are 47 species that have achieved faster than light travel but haven't been invited to join the Coalition," Mindlink 7 replied. "Most are considered too primitive or too aggressive for membership." Zethkar stood up from his command chair and walked to the large viewing window that showed the stars stretching out into infinity. Somewhere out there, the Void Swarm was consuming another world, growing stronger with each planet they devoured. Traditional Coalition tactics weren't working. They needed something different, something unexpected. "Show me the files on the most promising species," he ordered. A holographic display appeared in the air before him, showing detailed information about various civilizations. The Thoric Republic was too isolationist. The Zephyrian clans were skilled fighters but spent most of their time fighting each other. The Meridian Unity had good technology, but their religious beliefs prevented them from harming any living creature. Then he saw a file that made him pause. The species was listed as humans, from a small blue planet called Earth in the Sol system. According to the reports, they had only achieved faster than light travel 15 years ago, and were considered a minor civilization on the galactic scale, but something in their file caught his attention. The section on military capabilities was extensive despite their technological limitations. The report noted that humans had spent most of their recorded history engaged in warfare with each other. They had developed sophisticated tactics for fighting on land, sea, air, and even in space. Most interesting of all, they had recently emerged from what their historians called the Century of Conflicts, a period when their entire planet was engulfed in various wars. "Tell me about these humans," Zethkar said, pointing at the holographic display. Mindlink 7's expression remained neutral as he accessed the files. "Species designation human, planet Earth, Sol system, population approximately 8 billion, They achieved nuclear fusion 40 years ago and developed faster than light travel 15 years ago. Current threat assessment minimal. Military capabilities extensive but primitive by coalition standards. Primitive how? Their weapons rely on kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives rather than energy-based systems. Their ships use fusion drives instead of quantum engines. Their military organization is based on individual units rather than collective consciousness or honor-based hierarchies like most civilized species. Zethkar studied the information more carefully. The humans seemed to organize their military around something called chain of command, where individuals made decisions and gave orders to other individuals. It was a strange concept compared to the ethereal collective thinking or the Krillian honor codes that most coalition species used. What about their combat experience? He asked. Extensive, sir. Their historical records show continuous warfare spanning thousands of years. They have fought conflicts using every environment on their planet and have developed tactics for urban combat. Guerrilla warfare, siege operations, and large-scale battles involving millions of individuals. That was interesting. Most coalition species had achieved peace among themselves before developing space travel. The idea of a species that had fought continuous wars while advancing technologically was almost unheard of. Have we made contact with them? Limited contact, sir. They were sent a standard greeting message 10 years ago and invited to apply for coalition membership. They responded politely but declined, stating they were not ready for galactic politics. Zethkar made a decision that would change the course of the war. Send them another message? This time, don't ask them to join the coalition. Ask them to help us fight. Mindlink 7 tilted his head, a gesture that indicated confusion among his species. Sir, their technology is centuries behind ours. What assistance could they possibly provide? Experience, Zethkar replied. We've been fighting this war using the same tactics that have kept peace in the galaxy for 200 years. Those tactics aren't working against the Void Swarm. Maybe we need to think like warriors instead of peacekeepers. The message was sent that same day. Commander Zethkar crafted it personally, explaining the threat that the Void Swarm posed not just to the coalition, but to all life in the galaxy. He offered humanity advanced technology, medical knowledge, and a place in the galactic community in exchange for their military expertise and personnel. 3 days later, a reply came back. From Earth, it was brief and to the point in a way that reminded Zethkar of old military communications. The message simply stated that humanity would send a delegation to discuss terms. Captain Jake Morrison received the assignment with mixed feelings. He had spent 15 years in the United Earth Defense Force, working his way up from a young lieutenant to one of their most experienced commanders. He had seen action in the Mars colonies during the Separatist uprising and had commanded ships during the asteroid mining disputes. But nothing had prepared him for the possibility of fighting aliens from another galaxy. The briefing room at Earth Command was filled with tension as the senior staff discussed the Coalition's request. Some argued that humanity wasn't ready for galactic warfare. Others worried about the technology gap between human and alien civilizations. But the threat description was clear. If the Void Swarm wasn't stopped, they would eventually reach Earth. They're offering us quantum engines, energy weapons, and medical technology that could advance our civilization by centuries, said General Patricia Hayes, the head of Earth Command. In exchange, they want our soldiers and our tactical knowledge. Captain. Morrison stood up when his name was called. Sir, what exactly do they expect us to contribute? According to their own reports, our technology is primitive compared to theirs. General Hayes activated a holographic display showing the tactical reports from the Outer Rim battles. They're losing, Captain. Badly. Their tactics aren't working against this enemy. They need fresh ideas and warriors who think differently than they do. Morrison studied the battle reports with growing concern. The coalition forces were fighting defensively, trying to protect territory and minimize casualties. Against a conventional enemy, it might have worked. But the Void Swarm seemed to grow stronger with each battle, adapting and evolving in ways that made traditional tactics useless. When do we leave? He asked. The journey to Coalition space took 2 weeks aboard the newest human faster-than-light ship. Morrison brought with him Lieutenant Lisa Chun, a tactical specialist who had developed new urban combat techniques during the colony wars. Sergeant Tony Rodriguez joined them as their engineering expert, a man who could build weapons out of scrap metal and make explosives from household chemicals. Corporal Amy Johnson completed their team, a sniper whose skills had become legendary during the asteroid conflicts. The docking bay of Nexus 7 was unlike anything Captain Morrison had ever seen. The massive space station stretched for kilometers in every direction, with ships from dozens of different species coming and going through hundreds of docking ports. As Morrison and his team stepped off their transport, they found themselves surrounded by beings that looked like they had stepped out of science fiction movies. The first alien Morrison met was a Krillian warrior named Gorth, who stood nearly 3 meters tall with thick gray skin and 4 arms. The massive creature looked down at the humans with what might have been disappointment and spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "These are the famous human warriors we have heard about?" Gorth asked, his translator device, converting his words into English. "They look small and weak. Are you certain they are not civilians?" Lieutenant Chun stepped forward before Morrison could respond. "We may be small, but we didn't come here to impress anyone with our size. We came here to fight." Gorth made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "Fighting requires strength and honor, little one. Your species has neither from what I can observe." The tension was broken by the arrival of Healer Silas, a Valdorian whose pale blue skin seemed to glow with its own internal light. The tall, thin being moved with graceful steps and spoke in a musical voice that was somehow soothing to hear. "Welcome to Nexus 7, human warriors," Silas said with a slight bow. "I am eager to learn about your culture and your methods of warfare. Perhaps we can share knowledge during your time here." Morrison nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Healer Silas. We're honored to be here and ready to do whatever is necessary to stop the Void Swarm." The next few days were spent in orientation sessions, where the humans learned about Coalition military structure and the various species they would be working with. The ethereals communicated through shared thoughts rather than words, which made conversation impossible for humans. The Thorek were engineer soldiers who approached everything with mathematical precision. The Zephyrians were fast and agile, but seemed to treat warfare like a competitive sport rather than life-or-death combat. Training began with basic Coalition protocols. Morrison and his team learned to use energy weapons, which fired beams of concentrated light instead of bullets. The weapons were more powerful than anything humans had developed, but they felt strange in their hands. Rodriguez complained that the energy rifles had no recoil and made it difficult to know when they had fired. "These weapons are too clean," he muttered to Morrison during a break. "How do you know you hit something if it doesn't kick back?" Flight training was even more challenging. Coalition fighters used quantum engines that could change direction instantly without regard for momentum or gravity. Human pilots had learned to work with physics, using the weight and speed of their ships as weapons. The alien craft felt like flying a computer simulation rather than a real machine. Amy Johnson struggled with the energy sniper rifles during marksmanship training. The weapons had perfect accuracy and could hit targets at impossible distances, but they required the shooter to remain perfectly still while a targeting computer calculated the shot. Johnson was used to making instinctive adjustments for wind, gravity, and target movement. "This isn't sniping," she complained to Chun. "This is just pointing and clicking like a video game." The alien instructors seemed pleased with human progress. During these basic training exercises, the humans scored average marks in most areas and showed good discipline in following orders. Several alien recruits began to relax around the humans, thinking they were just another ordinary species learning Coalition methods. Everything changed during the psychological warfare simulation. The exercise was designed to test how recruits would handle impossible decisions during combat. The scenario placed each team in command of a small fleet defending a planet from enemy attack. The simulation was programmed so that the defenders could either save the civilian population or complete their military objective, but not both. The Krillian team chose to complete the military objective, accepting civilian casualties as the price of victory. Their culture valued strategic success over individual lives. The ethereal collective calculated the numbers and chose the option that would save the most lives overall. The Thoric teams ran precise mathematical analyses and made logical decisions. Based on statistical outcomes, when it was the human team's turn, Morrison studied the tactical display for several minutes while his team waited for orders. The scenario showed enemy forces approaching a colony world with 2 million civilians. The human fleet could either evacuate the civilians or destroy a key enemy staging area, but the timing made it impossible to do both. What are our options? Morrison asked as Team Chun reviewed the tactical data. We can save the civilians and let the enemy establish their base, or we can take out their staging area and leave the civilians to die. The simulation won't let us do both. Rodriguez was staring at the enemy formation with the intense focus he usually reserved for building. Explosives. Captain, what if we don't play by their rules? Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. What did you have in mind, Sergeant? Look at this enemy fleet, Rodriguez said, pointing at the display. They're bunched up tight around their command ship. If we could get one of our ships close enough to their formation, ... double quotes, Johnson caught on immediately. A ramming attack. Use our flagship as a missile to take out their command structure. That would destroy our most powerful ship and leave us defenseless, Chun pointed out. Not if we time it right, Morrison said, his mind already working through the possibilities. Rodriguez, can you rig our transport to explode on impact? Johnson. How long would you need to coordinate civilian evacuation from a sniper position? Chun, what's the minimum time we need to get our fleet into position for a follow-up attack? The alien instructors watched in confusion as the human team began planning something that wasn't part of the simulation. The exercise was designed to force a choice between two options. But the humans were creating a third option that shouldn't have been possible. Morrison's plan was insane by coalition standards. They would use their transport ship as a massive bomb, ramming it into the enemy command vessel while Rodriguez triggered an overload in the engines. Johnson would establish a sniper position on the planet's surface to provide cover for civilian evacuation ships. Chun would coordinate the remaining fleet in a high-speed attack that would capitalize on the chaos caused by the ramming attack. The simulation began and the human team immediately ignored all standard protocols. Instead of choosing between the two programmed options, they split their forces and attempted to achieve both objectives simultaneously. Morrison piloted the transport ship on a collision course with the enemy fleet, while his team worked frantically to make their impossible plan succeed. Rodriguez rerouted power from life support to weapons, turning their transport into a flying bomb. Johnson's character established a position on the planet and began picking off enemy scouts with precise shots that covered the civilian evacuation. Chun coordinated fleet movements that seemed chaotic but kept the enemy from concentrating their forces. The alien observers expected the simulation to end quickly with human failure. Instead, they watched in amazement as Morrison's ship smashed into the enemy command vessel, causing massive explosions that destroyed half the enemy fleet. The remaining human ships swept in to finish off the confused survivors while civilian transports escaped under Johnson's protective fire. When the simulation ended, the training computer displayed results that shouldn't have been possible. The humans had achieved both objectives with minimal casualties and had destroyed the enemy force completely. But they had also violated dozens of coalition military protocols and had used tactics that weren't programmed into the simulation. The alien instructors called an emergency meeting to discuss what they had witnessed. Several species representatives expressed concern about human unpredictability. The ethereal stated that human thought patterns were too chaotic to predict or understand. The Thoric complained that human tactics violated mathematical principles of warfare, but Gorth approached Morrison after the debriefing with something that might have been respect in his 4 eyes. Human Morrison, your people fought with honor today, even though your methods are strange. Perhaps I was wrong to judge you by your size. Healer Silas was even more direct in his curiosity. Captain Morrison, I must ask about your decision-making process. How did you conceive of an option that was not provided by the simulation? Morrison thought about the question for a moment before answering. We don't like being told we only have two choices when we can see a third one. Humans have a saying that there's always another way if you're willing to take the risk. Word spread quickly through the training facility about the human team's performance in the simulation. Some alien recruits became curious about human methods and began asking questions about human military history. Others became nervous about the unpredictable nature of human tactics and started avoiding the humans during off-duty hours. The training instructors revised their assessment of human capabilities, noting that while humans performed averagely in standard exercises, the alarm bells screamed through Nexus 7 at 3 in the morning, jolting Morrison from his sleep. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors as recruits from dozens of species scrambled to their assigned stations. Over the intercom system, Commander Zethkar's voice cut through the chaos with urgent instructions. All personnel report to battle stations immediately. This is not a drill. The Void Swarm has attacked HFY and established a beachhead. All available forces are being deployed for immediate reinforcement. Morrison's team assembled in the corridor outside their quarters within minutes, a speed that impressed even the military-minded Krillians. June carried her gear in a compact pack that could be deployed in seconds. Rodriguez had somehow managed to attach extra ammunition and tools to every available surface of his uniform. Johnson moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator, her sniper rifle slung across her back. Looks like our training just got cut short, Morrison said as they hurried toward the docking bay. Around them, alien recruits were moving with various levels of readiness. The ethereals glided in perfect formation, sharing thoughts to coordinate their movements. The Thoric marched in precise mathematical patterns. The Krillians stomped through the corridors with heavy determination, the briefing aboard the Coalition. Transport ship lasted only 20 minutes, but it painted a grim picture. HFY was a farming world with 12 million civilian inhabitants and minimal military defenses. The Void Swarm had sent a scout fleet of 30 bioships that had overwhelmed the planetary defense grid in less than 6 hours. The enemy has established landing zones on 3 continents, explained Captain Vexstar, a Sauron officer who commanded the relief force. Their bioships are already beginning to consume local resources to spawn additional units. Our mission is to establish a defensive perimeter around the main population centers and hold until the main fleet arrives. The tactical display showed HFY as a green and blue world covered with agricultural settlements. Red markers indicated where Void Swarm forces had landed and were spreading outward like infections. The enemy bioships looked like massive insects crossed with spaceships, pulsing with organic lights and extending tendrils. Into the ground. Morrison studied the enemy positions with growing concern. The swarm wasn't attacking random targets or trying to capture strategic locations. Instead, they were systematically consuming the planet's resources to build more ships and spawn more troops. It was like watching a virus multiply and fast forward. What's our estimated time before enemy reinforcements arrive? Chun asked. Unknown, Vexstar replied. Void Swarm tactics suggest they will continue building forces until they achieve overwhelming superiority. We must prevent them from establishing permanent breeding grounds on the planet's surface. The deployment went smoothly at first. Coalition forces landed at designated zones around the major cities and began setting up defensive positions. According to standard protocols, Krillian warriors took the heavy assault positions. Ethereal units provided coordination and communications. Thoric engineers built fortified positions with mathematical precision. Morrison's human team was assigned to a support role in the eastern sector, backing up a mixed unit of Krillian and Thoric defenders. The alien commanders seemed to view humans as useful but unremarkable additions to their forces. Morrison didn't mind the supporting role, but he kept his team alert and ready for anything. The first Void Swarm attack came at dawn on the second day. The bioships launched waves of smaller organisms that looked like flying insects the size of small aircraft. These creatures moved in coordinated swarms, diving at coalition positions with kamikaze attacks that released clouds of toxic spores. Coalition forces responded with standard defensive tactics. Energy weapons created overlapping fields of fire that destroyed most of the attacking organisms before they could reach the perimeter. Heavy shields deflected the spore clouds while medics treated the few soldiers who were exposed to the toxins, but Morrison noticed something troubling in the enemy attack patterns. The Void Swarm creatures weren't just attacking randomly. They were testing coalition defenses, probing for weaknesses, and learning from each failed assault. Worse yet, the bioships on the ground were pulsing with increased activity, spawning new types of creatures based on what they had learned. "They're adapting," Morrison told Chun as they watched the latest wave of attackers retreat after being repelled. "Each attack is different from the last one. They're figuring out our tactics," Chun nodded grimly. "And our people are fighting the same way every time. The Krillians charge straight ahead, the Ethereals coordinate perfectly but predictably, and the Thoric follow mathematical formulas for defense." The second day brought larger attacks with new types of swarm creatures. Some were heavily armored and could survive direct hits from energy weapons. Others moved too fast for the coalition's targeting systems to track effectively. A few released electromagnetic pulses that disrupted alien technology and communications. Coalition casualties began mounting as their rigid tactics proved inadequate against the constantly evolving enemy. The Krillians fought bravely, but their honor-bound charges became predictable. The Ethereals coordinated flawlessly, but couldn't adapt fast enough to counter new enemy variants. The Thoric built perfect defenses against yesterday's attacks, but struggled when the enemy changed tactics. By the third day, the situation was becoming desperate. Void Swarm forces had doubled in size and were pushing coalition defenders back toward the civilian population centers. 3 defensive positions had already fallen, and enemy bioships were spawning faster than the coalition could destroy them. Morrison called his team together during a brief lull in the fighting. They gathered in a bombed-out building that had once been a farming supply store, surrounded by the sounds of distant combat and the eerie pulsing noises made by swarm bioships. "We need to change the game," Morrison said without preamble. "The enemy is learning our tactics faster than we can adapt. If we keep fighting defensively, they'll eventually overwhelm us through sheer numbers." Rodriguez was examining the remains of a destroyed swarm creature with professional interest. "Captain, these things are part machine and part animal. They're grown rather than built, which means they need some kind of central coordination to maintain their complexity." Johnson had been studying the enemy positions through her rifle scope. "I've been watching their movement patterns for 3 days. The smaller creatures always stay within a certain distance of the bioships. It's like they need to maintain some kind of connection." Chun pulled up a tactical map on her portable computer. The bioships themselves seemed to coordinate with each other through some kind of signal network. If we could disrupt that network. Morrison felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with seeing a solution to an impossible problem. "We need to stop thinking like defenders and start thinking like hunters. Instead of waiting for them to attack our positions, we go after their command structure." The plan Morrison proposed would have been rejected immediately by any coalition commander. Instead of maintaining defensive positions, he wanted to take a small team deep into enemy territory to attack the bioships directly. The mission would require moving through areas controlled by the swarm, penetrating their defensive perimeters and destroying targets that were heavily defended. "It's suicide," Chun pointed out, though her tone suggested she was already working out the tactical details. "Maybe," Morrison admitted. "But if we can take out their coordination centers, the smaller creatures should become confused and disorganized. That would give our main forces a chance to push them back." Rodriguez grinned as he started calculating explosive requirements. "I can build charges that will take down those bioships, but we'll need to get close enough to plant them manually. These energy weapons won't penetrate their organic armor." Johnson was already planning sniper positions. "I can provide overwatch and pick off any sentries. But once we start the attack, every swarm creature in the area will come after us. Morrison made the decision that would change everything. We're going to do this mission with or without official approval. But first, we need to let our alien allies know what we're planning. When Morrison presented his plan to the sector commanders, their reactions were exactly what he expected. Captain Vexstar called it reckless and refused to authorize the mission. The Krillian war leader Gorth said it violated every principle of honorable warfare. The ethereal collective calculated the probability of success at less than 12%. This plan requires abandoning defensive positions and accepting massive risks with no guarantee of success, Vexstar stated firmly. Coalition doctrine clearly prohibits such unauthorized operations. Morrison looked around the command post at the alien officers who were all staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. These were experienced military leaders from civilizations that had been fighting wars for thousands of years, but they couldn't understand why anyone would choose such a dangerous plan. With respect, sir, coalition doctrine isn't working, Morrison replied. We've lost ground every day since we arrived. The enemy is getting stronger while we're getting weaker. If we don't try something different, we're going to lose this planet and everyone. Morrison's team moved through the darkness like ghosts, using every piece of cover the ruined landscape provided. The void swarm had turned the once fertile farmland into a nightmare of twisted organic growths and pulsing biomachinery. Strange lights flickered in the distance where the alien ships were spawning new creatures, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy that made Morrison's skin crawl. Ching led the way using night vision equipment that the Coalition had provided, but she moved with the instincts of someone who had learned urban warfare in the bombed-out cities of Mars. Every few minutes she would signal for the team to freeze, while swarm patrol creatures passed overhead, their wings beating with a sound like helicopter rotors made of flesh. Rodriguez carried a pack filled with improvised explosives that he had built from Coalition energy cells and farming chemicals they had found in abandoned buildings. The alien instructors would have been horrified to see their advanced technology being converted into crude bombs, but Rodriguez worked with the focused intensity of an artist creating a masterpiece. Johnson moved at the rear of their formation with her rifle ready, scanning for threats that might approach from behind. She had already identified 17 different types of swarm creatures during their approach, cataloging their movement patterns and weak points with the patience of a hunter who knew that one mistake would get them all killed. The first bioship loomed ahead of them like a living mountain. The massive creature was part spacecraft and part organism, with a hull that pulsed like a heartbeat and tendrils that extended deep into the ground. Smaller creatures moved around, its base like antibodies protecting a vital organ, and Morrison could see the ship spawning new units from openings that looked disturbingly like mouths. There, Chun whispered, pointing to a section of the bioship where the organic armor looked thinner. If we can get Rodriguez close enough to that spot, his charges should penetrate to the vital systems. Morrison studied the target through his binoculars, counting at least 30 guard creatures patrolling the immediate area. The approach would require crossing 200 meters of open ground, while avoiding detection by enemies that could probably smell human scent from a kilometer away. Johnson, can you create a distraction on the far side of the ship? Morrison asked quietly. Johnson was already calculating angles and distances. Give me 10 minutes to get into position. I can take out their sentries and make them think the attack is coming from the east. Rodriguez, how long do you need to plant the charges? 3 minutes once I reach the target, Rodriguez replied. But I'll need someone to watch my back while I work. Morrison made his decision with the kind of split-second judgment that had kept him alive through a dozen combat zones. Johnson creates the distraction, Rodriguez plants the charges, Chun and I provide covering fire. Once the first ship goes down, we move to the next target before they can coordinate a response. What happened next would be discussed in Coalition military academies for decades to come. Johnson's first shot took out a swarm sentry from 800 meters away, the creature's head exploding in a spray of green fluid that sent the other guards into immediate alarm. But instead of investigating the shot, She immediately shifted position and fired again from a completely different angle. The swarm creatures reacted exactly as Johnson had predicted, rushing toward what they thought was the source of the attack. But Johnson was already moving again, using a technique called shoot and scoot that kept the enemy constantly confused about her location. Every few seconds another guard creature would fall, but the shots seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Rodriguez sprinted across the open ground with Morrison and Chun providing covering fire. But the humans weren't using the precise, calculated shooting techniques they had learned in coalition training. Instead, they fired in short bursts while moving, using suppression tactics that kept enemy heads down rather than trying for perfect accuracy. Morrison found himself fighting with an intensity that surprised even him. When a swarm creature leaped at Rodriguez from behind, Morrison didn't calculate the best angle for a clean kill. He simply emptied his entire energy clip into the creature's center mass, sending it tumbling backward in a smoking heap. Chen moved like a dancer through the chaos, her rifle speaking in controlled bursts that dropped enemies with mechanical precision. But when her weapon overheated, she didn't retreat to a safe position to let it cool. Instead, she drew her sidearm and continued fighting at close range, using her smaller weapon to cover Rodriguez while he worked. Rodriguez reached the bioship and immediately began placing charges with the focused intensity of someone who had done this kind of work under fire before. But halfway through the process, a massive swarm creature burst from the ground beneath him, its claws reaching for his throat. Morrison didn't think about tactics or proper procedure. He launched himself at the creature in a flying tackle that sent both of them tumbling away from Rodriguez. The alien monster was twice Morrison's size and covered in natural armor, but Morrison fought with a desperate fury that seemed to confuse the creature more than hurt it. Chun arrived seconds later and put 3 energy bolts into the creature's head at point-blank range, killing it instantly. But Morrison was already rolling away and reaching for Rodriguez, who had been knocked unconscious by the creature's emergence. "Charges are set," Rodriguez mumbled as Morrison helped him to his feet. 30 seconds to detonation. The team ran for cover as the bioship began to pulse with increasing intensity, its internal systems apparently detecting the threat to its existence. Swarm creatures poured from the ship's openings like insects from a disturbed nest, but Johnson's continuing sniper fire kept them disorganized and confused. The explosion was unlike anything the humans had ever witnessed. The bioship didn't simply blow apart like a mechanical target. Instead, it seemed to die like a living creature, its organic systems shutting down in waves while it spawned units, immediately stopped moving and collapsed, but there was no time to celebrate. Morrison could see the other bioships in the area, beginning to pulse with alarm signals, and new types of swarm creatures were emerging from their depths. These new variants looked different from the ones they had fought before, with thicker armor and more aggressive movement patterns. "They're adapting to our tactics already," Chun observed as they moved toward their second target. Morrison smiled grimly. "Then we'll just have to adapt faster." The attack on the second bioship was completely different from the first. Rodriguez had learned to use the bioship's own organic conduits to carry his explosives deeper into its systems. Johnson discovered that the creatures were vulnerable to psychological warfare, becoming confused and disorganized when she targeted specific individuals in their formations. Chung began using the swarm's own coordination systems against them, leading groups of creatures into ambush by making them think they were chasing retreating humans. Morrison found that the creatures could be provoked into making tactical mistakes by threatening their bioships directly. By the time they destroyed the third bioship, word of their success had reached the coalition forces. But the reports that came back to the main base described human tactics that seemed impossible to the alien commanders who received them. Captain Vextar read the field reports with growing disbelief. Human soldiers were described as fighting with controlled madness and emotional intensity beyond normal parameters. They apparently ignored proper cover and concealment in favor of aggressive attacks that confused and demoralized the enemy. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to fight more effectively when they were injured or outnumbered. Instead of retreating when wounded, Morrison had continued fighting with a broken arm. Rodriguez had triggered an explosion while still in the blast radius to ensure it would destroy its target. Johnson had maintained her sniper position despite taking enemy fire from 3 directions. Gorth approached the command post after witnessing the humans return from their mission. The massive Krillian warrior looked shaken, which was something none of the other Coalition officers had ever seen before. "Commander Vexstar, I must speak with you about the human warriors," Gorth said in his grinding voice. "What about them?" Vexstar asked, though he suspected he already knew what the Krillian would say. "They fight like demons," Gorth replied. "But they fight like demons who care more about protecting others than preserving their own lives. I have never seen warriors who would accept certain death to achieve their objectives." Healer Celeste was even more disturbed by what he had observed while treating the human team's injuries. "Their pain tolerance is beyond normal biological parameters," he reported. "But more concerning is their emotional state during combat. They seem to derive strength from anger and protective instinct rather than logical determination." As news of the human team's success spread through the Coalition forces, reactions were immediate and intense. The tactical victory was undeniable. Their unauthorized mission had crippled the swarm's coordination network and allowed Coalition forces to push the enemy back for the first time since the battle began. But the cost of that victory had terrified half the alien witnesses. The victory celebration at Nexus 7 felt hollow to Captain Morrison as he watched alien recruits deliberately avoiding eye contact with his team. News of their success on HFY had spread through the station faster than wildfire, but the reactions were not what anyone had expected. Instead of congratulations and respect, the humans found themselves surrounded by an invisible wall of fear and discomfort. Morrison sat in the station's main cafeteria with his team, noticing how other tables gradually emptied when they sat down. The ethereal collective members who had previously shared meals with them now gathered at the far end of the room, their crystalline forms pulsing with agitated colors. The Krillian warriors who had once challenged the humans to arm wrestling contests now gave them a wide berth. "Captain, is it just me or is everyone acting weird around us?" Rodriguez asked, poking at his alien food ration with obvious distaste. Chun looked around the nearly empty cafeteria and sighed. "It's not just you. Ever since we got back from the mission, it's like we've got some kind of disease that everyone's afraid of catching." Johnson hadn't spoken much since their return, but Morrison could see the confusion in her eyes. She was a soldier who had always taken pride in her professional skills, and the rejection from their alien allies was hitting her hard. The first official indication of trouble came the next morning when Morrison was called to Commander Zethkar's office. The reptilian commander looked tired and frustrated as he gestured for Morrison to sit across from his desk. Between them lay a stack of data pads that seemed to grow taller every few minutes as new reports arrived. "Captain Morrison, we need to discuss a problem that has developed since your return from HFY," Zethkar began, his scaled fingers drumming nervously on his desk. "I have received 47 formal requests for transfer away from human units in the past 18 hours. Morrison felt his stomach drop. "Transfer requests? From who?" "Nearly every species in the training program," Zethkar replied, picking up the nearest datapad. "The Ethereal Collective has submitted a group request citing cognitive incompatibility with human thought patterns. They claim that working alongside humans causes what they call mental static that interferes with their collective consciousness." The commander picked up another pad. 12 Krillian warriors have requested immediate reassignment to units without human members. They cite concerns about what they call battle madness and claim that human combat methods violate their codes of honorable warfare. Morrison's hands clenched into fists despite his efforts to remain calm. "Sir, we completed our mission successfully. We stopped the Void Swarm from establishing permanent positions on HFY. Isn't that what matters?" Zethkar's yellow eyes fixed on Morrison with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Captain, your tactical success is not in question. The mission reports from HFY describe the most effective anti-swarm operations we have recorded. Your methods disrupted enemy coordination networks in ways that our best scientists thought impossible. The commander stood up and walked to the large window that showed the stars beyond the station. But those same reports describe human combat behavior that has deeply disturbed our allied forces. Your team apparently fought with what observers called controlled fury and emotional intensity, beyond normal parameters. Morrison tried to understand what he was being told. We fought to win, sir. We did whatever was necessary to complete the mission and protect innocent civilians. Yes, and that is precisely what concerns our allies, Zethkar said quietly. Captain Morrison, most civilized species have moved beyond emotional warfare. We fight with logic, honor codes, or collective coordination. We do not fight with rage, even controlled rage. The full scope of the problem became clear over the next few days as Morrison spoke with various alien representatives. MindLink 7, from the Ethereal Collective, explained their position with mechanical precision that somehow managed to sound apologetic. Human Morrison, your species' combat methods create what we can only describe as psychological interference, the Tall Blue alien said. When humans fight, they project emotional energy that disrupts our collective thought processes. We find ourselves experiencing individual feelings of anger and protective instinct that are foreign to our nature. Morrison met with Gorth to get the Krillian perspective, hoping that the warrior culture would be more understanding of human methods. But even the massive four-armed fighter seemed uncomfortable as he explained his people's concerns. Human Morrison, the Krillian way of war, is based on personal honor and courage in battle, Gorth said in his grinding voice. We accept death before dishonor and fight for glory as much as victory. But your people fight with something we do not understand. What do you mean? Morrison asked. You fight with love, Gorth replied, the translator struggling to convey the concept in his language. Love for your teammates, love for innocent civilians, love for abstract concepts like justice and freedom. This makes you willing to sacrifice everything, including honor and glory, to protect others. The conversation that disturbed Morrison most came with healer Silas, who had always been supportive of human participation in the coalition. The gentle Valdorian seemed genuinely troubled as he explained his people's decision to request transfers away from human medical units. Captain Morrison, please understand that we respect your species' dedication to protecting life, Silas said, his musical voice carrying notes of distress. But we have observed human warriors continuing to fight, with injuries that should have rendered them unconscious. We have seen your people accept wounds that would kill most species rather than abandon their positions. Silas paused, his pale blue skin flickering with patterns that indicated deep concern. Most disturbing of all, we have observed that humans seem to draw strength from their protective instincts. The more desperate the situation becomes, the more fiercely you fight. This is beyond our understanding of normal combat psychology. By the end of the week, the transfer requests had grown to include more than half of the alien recruits in the program. Species after species cited similar concerns about human unpredictability, emotional intensity, and willingness to accept extreme risks. The formal complaints used diplomatic language, but the underlying message was clear. Aliens were afraid to fight alongside humans. Commander Zethkar called an emergency meeting of the Coalition Council to address what was being called the human problem. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to debate whether humanity should be integrated into coalition forces or contained in separate units. The debate was intense and sometimes hostile. Some military commanders argued that human effectiveness against the Void Swarm made them too valuable to restrict. Others claimed that human presence was destroying unit cohesion and morale among traditional coalition forces. The turning point came when Captain Morrison was invited to address the council directly. He stood before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, feeling very small and very human in a room full of beings who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Honored members of the Coalition Council, Morrison began, I have been told that many of your people find human methods of warfare disturbing. I want to explain why we fight the way we do. Morrison looked around the chamber at the various alien faces, some curious, some fearful, some openly hostile. Every species here has achieved peace among your own people before reaching the stars. You fight with logic, honor, or collective purpose because war is something you do when necessary. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Humans are different. We spent thousands of years fighting each other before we learned to work together. We know war intimately, not as an abstract concept, but as a constant companion throughout our history. Morrison's voice grew stronger as he continued. We don't fight because we enjoy violence or because we lack civilization. We fight because we have learned that sometimes the only way to protect the things we love is to become monsters ourselves. We accept that burden so others don't have to. The chamber fell silent as Morrison delivered his final words. You find our methods disturbing because we fight with emotion instead of logic. But that emotion is love. Love for our teammates, love for innocent people, love for the idea that civilization should protect the weak instead of consuming them. If that makes us frightening allies, then perhaps the galaxy needs to be frightened. The debate continued for hours after Morrison left the chamber, but the decision was already clear. The coalition would establish separate human military units, acknowledging that while humanity's warriors were too effective to lose, they were too intense for most species to work alongside. The announcement came 3 days later. Human forces would be organized into independent units with their own command structure and operational methods. Alien species that wished to work with humans could volunteer for joint operations, but no one would be required to serve alongside. Human units. Morrison felt mixed emotions as he read the official directive. On one hand, his people had proven themselves as effective warriors against the galaxy's greatest threat. On the other hand, they had apparently done so in a way that terrified their allies almost as much as their enemies.